Good evening and welcome to Smith Falls Committee of the Whole for Monday, May 13th. We will start with amendments to the agenda. Councillor Dwyer.
Thank you. I have one. I was anticipating that the Confederation Bridge was going to appear on tonight's agenda for council discussion, and it's not here. So can we add it?
Councillor Alford.
Sorry, I didn't have the same understanding. My understanding was that staff was forwarding us what was done in 2016, and that then after we had processed all of that, I thought there was a date of the end of June that we were to revisit that. That's what I recall.
I may have misunderstood, but that was your understanding too? Was end of June?
From Director Dunlop's comments with the volume of things he's engaged in right now, that it would be sometime in June, I guess.
Right. Thank you.
So we can move on from amendments to the agenda to disclosure of monetary interest. Councillor Dwyer.
I have one. It's not a disclosure under our council code of conduct, but it is under my professional code of ethics as a professional land use planner. For that reason, I would declare an interest in item 6C, the notice of the County of Lanark's proposed amendment proposes population increases to Mississippi Mills.
Noted. Any other disclosure of monetary interest? Seeing none, we'll move on to we have no delegations this evening. We'll move on to adoption of minutes for the Tuesday, April 23rd, 2019 Committee of the Whole meeting. Can I get a motion to receive the minutes? Councillor Allen, seconded by Councillor McKenna. All in favor? Carried. CAO and Directors reports.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We have several, starting with Director Dunlop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 4 items I'd just like to update the committee on this evening. Number 1, I just want to report that our tender closed for the pavement marking program last Thursday. We received 2 bids. Our low bid was slightly over budget. We will be bringing forward a report to committee for consideration at the next Committee of the Whole. This coming Friday, myself and the CAO will be attending the Eastern Ontario Waste Sector meeting. It's going to be happening at our local community center. We're going to be hearing an overview of waste issues that are facing our sector. We're also going to be discussing the province's intentions as they relate to the rollout of extended producer responsibility. There's also going to be discussions on the provincial objectives as they relate to organics diversion, so it's going to be a very interesting session that day. Today, I'd like to mention that I met with Clearwater Structures on site at the Old Lock Bridge, and they are scheduled to mobilize this week, likely for Wednesday. They'll be finishing the last stage of the bridge improvements, which is going to be the transitionary paving, both, we'll say upstream and downstream of the renovated bridge deck. So that'll be taking out a bit of the speed hump that we've lived with through most of the winter. So again, that work couldn't be conducted last fall because of the onset of cold weather. The last item I wanted to update this evening was we received correspondence from the Ministry of Environment in the last about week and a half. The ministry is reaching out to all municipalities with surface drinking water systems. They will be implementing a mandatory program on or before 2021 that will oblige municipalities to start screening for blue-green algae, essentially blooms in the watersheds. What that really is going to involve essentially is visual monitoring, testing of our raw and treated water, probably on a weekly basis from the months of June through October. So it will translate into additional costs on our end, so it's something we're going to be looking at with our service review that's underway. And again, it's not mandatory at this point, but it's certainly something that we're obviously going to be transitioning into very soon. So, and that's it.
All right, thank you, Director Dunlop. Questions, Councillor McKenna?
Thank you, Director Dunlop. The Friday Waste Day, or Waste technical, it sounds technical in nature. They're talking about so it's staff and regional municipalities coming together to better understand changes coming in that area?
Yes, it's essentially a group of speakers from various municipalities that will be presenting again on we'll call it shared waste issues impacting our region. And again, we're trying to look at this cooperatively and have a unified voice to the province in terms of how we respond to the rollout of these new initiatives.
I don't know about the rest of my colleagues, but I'd be interested in hearing the debrief after, or if there's a report coming out or something. It's an important issue that we're not talking enough about.
Very important issue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Councillor Brennan.
Thanks, Troy. Thanks, Troy. On the bridge, that's great news that there'll be no speed bump there. But what's the duration of that work, first of all?
Probably 3 days from what I heard today. They can mill in the rain, so it's not weather dependent, and based on the forecast for Thursday and Friday, we should have ample weather to get top lifts down. So
That's great. And,
hopefully 3 days.
yeah, and through the chair, just one more thing, and just to follow up, because I've been asked a number of times about the sidings, and what are you guys going to do with? Are you going to make them the same? And we know the answer is not all at once. And but the painting of them, we talked about before. Hopefully, we can look at something there.
Yeah, through the chair, one of the takeaways I had from the last meeting is to again look at options to tidy them up for the foreseeable period till our next renovation goes through. And again, painting seems to be the solution. We just got to find a shade of gray we can all live with. So.
There's 50 shades of gray.
Yes, exactly.
All right, moving on. Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you, Director Dunlop. Next up, CAO Morris.
Ms. Miller has an update. It probably won't be great.
No shade of gray. So a few announcements tonight. We have taken part in 2 recent trade shows in Ottawa. The Ottawa Travel Show had 18,000 visitors, and the 55 Plus Lifestyle Show had 10,000 visitors. Our goal was to promote day trip experiences to Smiths Falls, and we had a great reception. We highlighted our new heritage walking tours, which will be starting this summer, and swale paddling tours as well. LeBoat shared our booths, and so that was a great draw. Special thank you to Councillors Brennan, Alfred, and Allen, who worked with us at the Smiths Falls Home Show last weekend. The turnout was great, and we were happy to promote all of these activities to local citizens as well. We continue to get great press across Canada, and I just wanted to highlight that in the Ottawa Construction Report, we were highlighted in the April publication as one of Canada's top 10 communities for economic development. And that publication can be found at ontarioconstructionreport.com. We hosted a workforce development conference earlier in May with OnTrack, Valley Heartland, and the Small Business Advisory Center for local businesses who wanted to learn more about attracting and retaining talent. As our economy grows, this is a key area to keep an eye on, and we were happy to host 57 local businesses that day. A quick update, we've received the completed communications strategy that we contracted through Dragonfly Communications. It was an extensive look at our internal and external communications, and in the coming weeks I will be sharing it with Council along with some recommendations. And just finally, a reminder of 2 events we have coming up in June. The Spirit of the Drum Powwow is our 3rd annual on Duck Island, June 8th and 9th. It's organized by SFDCI students and teachers with our support. And then new this year is the Rise Yoga and Wellness Festival on June 15th in Centennial Park. It will feature live music, yoga for all ages, and a wellness market.
Excellent, thank you. Any questions or comments? All right. Moving right along.
Next is Director Castell.
Thank you. 3 quick updates for Council this evening. The first is to put a plea out that we're still accepting applications for 4 of our local boards and committees. Airport Commission, Heritage House Museum Advisory Board, Property Standards Committee, as well as the Smiths Falls Drug Strategy. We have openings on all of those boards, so if anybody knows of anybody who would like to spend some time on these boards, the application is online, or they can contact the clerk's office, and we would be happy to send it to them. Second, just a note that we are hosting the Zone 6 Clerks Forum in Smiths Falls this week. It is at the arena. It's May 15th and 16th. The first day is a day-long workshop, and there'll be clerks throughout the county. I think there's about 50 registered right now. The second day is our Zone 6 meeting, and we have 2 speakers from Tweed who are going to attend and speak to all the delegates. So we're very pleased to be hosting that session here in Smiths Falls. The third is just an update for council. As many of you may know, back in March, I believe, a letter was sent to all of you, and it came from the Minister of Community Safety. And it was regarding a letter regarding the OSPCA and how they're backing away from both the enforcement of animal cruelty as well as the investigation component of it. So to that end, we have been working with our local police force as well as our bylaw enforcement officers to kind of see where those pieces are going to fall. So as it stands right now, and in consultation with the OSPCA, our local police force will be taking up both the investigation and enforcement of animal cruelty. That's something new to them. It is something that both bylaw enforcement and the police are going to have to resource appropriately. This is province-wide, so all municipalities are now going to be, I don't want to say inundated, it hasn't historically been a problem in Smiths Falls, but it is another additional download that the police force is going to have to take on. The OSPCA will still retain a bit of a support role, but they will not be doing the enforcement regarding animal cruelty cases. So locally, like I said, both town staff, police, and bylaw enforcement officers have met to discuss the transition. We're going to be in a bit of a transition period. This is going to take effect the end of June. So we're in transition. We're going to be in transition, and we're going to report back to council when we come up with a concrete plan on what's going to fall on which department. Just to let you know, though, that that has not been lost with all the new legislation coming down. That's it.
All right, thank you, Director Costello. Councillor McKenna.
Thank you. The legislative change regarding the animal cruelty, they haven't changed the legislation around cruelty, it's just who's going to enforce it or investigate it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, none of the legislation hasn't changed. The OSPCA felt as a charity that they shouldn't be in charge of law enforcement. So now the law enforcement and the enforcement and investigation will be charged to local police services.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, thank you, Director Costello. CAO Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 2 items this evening. First one is to take committee back to last week's meeting. We had a discussion about projects for funding, and the subject of Confederation Bridge came up. I had erroneously indicated that Confed Bridge had been removed from our asset management plan. That was not correct information. It is in the asset management plan, so I apologize for that. It's listed at just slightly above $2.5 million as a replacement value. That's not budgeted. That's simply a number, a placeholder in the asset management plan. So I just wanted to correct for committee and for the public that it does exist, indeed, it exists in our asset management plan. More to come on that, as we talked about earlier. Second item is we've been municipalities have been faced with a spate of legislative changes, some perhaps downloads. So we're trying to make sense of all of that. It's happening at a very rapid pace. So we've had changes to funding formulas for land ambulance, childcare, health unit, we heard about that. Ontario Works funding formula looks like it might be changing. So those are kind of imposed changes to funding relationships. They'll have a real and measurable impact. We just don't know what that impact is today. AMO was at a meeting on Friday, and AMO's got all the resources devoted to understanding what the overall municipal impact will be. So once we get that, all staff will bring it to this table so we can get our heads around. We know the health unit adjustment in cost sharing means about $52,000 a year. The other ones could individually exceed that. So it's not a small change that we're facing financially. There are a whole host of other things underway the province is looking at. I have a list of 24 policies or positions that the government has that they're looking at changing. Some won't affect us. The regional review in the Golden Horseshoe area won't affect us directly, but it might set some precedent in terms of two-tier municipal governments. The province is committed to looking at joint and several liability. That's something this council has lobbied for years to change. So we're thankful that's coming. OSIF funding, OMPF funding, it's all on the block for discussion. So that's just a small couple of examples of what's going to affect us. So we've been working, Janet in particular, with the county to understand some of those shared services like ambulance that was just announced last 7th, last Wednesday or Tuesday. So it's all very fresh, but once we get our heads around it, we'll have a conversation here so that you understand what the impact will be, and you can then make decisions whether that's something that would be an appropriate topic for future engagements with provincial our provincial counterparts. So more to come. Thank you.
All right, thank you, C.O. Morris. Questions, comments? Seeing none, we can move on to correspondence item 6A, a notice from the Township of Montague dated April 18th, 2019. The topic is notice of public meeting concerning proposed zoning bylaw amendment at 7497 Roger Stevens Drive. It was for information only. Is there any questions or comments, Councillor Brennan?
Yeah, just a comment for everyone's, I believe that's the old flea market that is such a eyesore, and so that's a great news story for a gateway into our town. I believe it's going to be a storage facility, but it'll look a lot better than it does.
Yeah, that's great news. All right, Councillor Alfred.
Yes, it will be a wonderful improvement, but it is the gateway to one of the major arteries through our town, so I don't know that it's typical that we comment, but we are a neighbor, and obviously we've been notified. But is there anything with regard to suggestions we might want to make in terms of landscaping or a setback from the actual Roger Stevens Drive or anything of that nature? Because it is one of the main entrances to our town, to encourage the Montague to perhaps require something attractive. The storage units will be, Councillor Brennan's right, much improved, but I just want to make sure that if we have a voice, to voice to Montague and interns, whoever is doing this, that there be some requirement for it to be attractive as possible coming into Smiths Falls.
Mr. Granke, did you want to comment? Did you have a...
Can I ask a question first?
Yeah, Councillor Dwyer.
Sorry, this is a question for Carl as well, but Carl, how would we provide comment when you represent both our municipality and Montague? Would we default to a third party to do so, or would Montague end up defaulting their contract to the municipality to allow you to provide comments on our behalf?
Through the chair, I think it would, through the shared services agreement between the two municipalities, if there is an event of a conflict, then Smiths Falls would retain the services of the planner, and Montague would typically need to seek other opinion, and I think we would be looking at those sorts of situations on a case-by-case basis, and it depends on the nature of the comments that we have, if these are the sorts of things that can be addressed directly between the municipalities, or if this is a situation where there is truly a conflict, in which case we would need to work those details out with Montague. In response to Councillor Alfred's question, if council approves this new land use, then certainly as a new commercial development, they would be obligated to enter into a site plan agreement with the township, and the township's official plan contains policies regarding the settlement area there, and ensuring the attractive nature of any development, especially surrounded by residential land uses that is.
Councillor Dwyer.
Has a copy of the site plan been submitted yet? Perhaps receiving a copy of it would quell some of Councillor Alfred's questions. Taking a look at what's been draft submitted might help to provide some context about what the landscaping is going to look like.
Certainly, we can definitely provide that. The site plan application has not been advanced since the zoning hasn't been approved, but as a matter of course, and certainly I've had planning applications on both sides of the municipal boundary, and I refer those back and forth between colleagues on both sides to make sure that everybody's kept in the loop. So I think that would be a reasonable thing we can do.
So thank you. I think my comment on that is just I'm a little leery of pushing anything on Montague or giving a strong opinion on it when we don't have any enforceable design guidelines or well-enforced property standards in our own downtown core or the greater towns. So, but definitely good points all around. Anything else for that one? Okay, so moving on to 6B, letter dated May 9th, 2019 from Mr. Vincent Hamilton. It was a letter and petition. The document is available for viewing in the clerk's office, and on recommendation of staff, because there's a request to read the letter, and according to the procedural bylaw, that means we read it. So I'm going to ask that it be added as a priority issue 8I, I believe. Yeah, Councillor Brennan.
I think that in the past, when we've had a correspondence item, you just read it now, and then it's been read, and then there's no really discussion required other than the reading of the letter. I look to the clerk, deputy clerk.
Certainly, it's up to council. The last time it was read as a priority issue in case there's an action. If there's going to be an action come out of it, then you should have it as a priority issue.
It's up to committee.
What would an action include?
Sorry, if council wishes to discuss the letter and petition that was received, then I would suggest that you add it as a priority issue, and possibly there could be an action or no action come from that. But it's up to council. If you wish to go ahead and read it now, you can, but you could add it as a priority issue in case there was an action out of it.
Okay, is there any, is anybody looking to have a discussion? So, okay, so we'll read it now then, I think. Okay, so May 8th, 2019, attention Mayor Panko, Councillor Alford, McKenna, Allen, McGuire, Dwyer, Brennan, and dear Ms. Costello, it is hereby requested that this letter be submitted as a correspondence item and read at the May 13th, 2019 council meeting as per council bylaw. It should be noted for clarification that on March 11th and April 8th, 2019, petitions totaling at that time, April 8th, of 3,939 signatures have been submitted regarding Smiths Falls and area residents' requests that this council reverse its revisit of the option 1 choice of the previous council, and further, that council provide a true public forum to address the concerns of the public. The petition signatures hereby submitted with this correspondence include an additional 10 online signatures and 1,093 hard copy signatures, which bring the total signatories to date to 5,042 from Smith Falls and area residents. It should be noted that subsequent to the last submission of these petitions, there were council discussions regarding the relevancy as to how many signatures were declared as directly from Smith Falls residents. The signatures have as a result been vetted, and it is determined that of the total 5,047 signatures presented to date, there are 3,312 declared as directly from Smith Falls residents. As to the question of relevancy of this figure, it might be noted that as per the 2018 municipal election, it was declared that there were 6,498 eligible voters. 3,312 signatures exceed one-half of the total eligible voters of 2018. Please note that further compilation of petition signatures will continue and will be presented as deemed necessary. The additional petition signatures, which bring the total to 5,047, and the 3,312 from Smith Falls residents are hereby submitted for the consideration of the Smith Falls Town Council. Respectively, Vincent Hamilton. Since there's no discussion on that correspondence item, we'll move on to 6C, notice from the County of Lanark dated April 23rd, 2019. The topic is notice of public meeting concerning proposed amendment to the County of Lanark Sustainable Communities Plan. Any questions, comments on this one? Seeing none, we'll move on to number 7, in-camera issues. Do we have a motion to go in camera for a personnel matter about an identifiable individual? Councillor Brennan, seconded by Councillor Allen. All in favor? Carried.
council.
All right, so moving out of in camera, we have for 7A, we've got, we're going to add priority item I, appointments to town committees.
Yep.
And for 7B, we're going to add priority item H, Beckwith Street redevelopment. Okay, so moving on to priority issue 8A, Victoria Park lease agreement with the Chamber of Commerce report. Jennifer Miller.
Thank you. So we've been working diligently with the Chamber of Commerce over the last few months to redevelop our agreement for the usage of Victoria Park. So as you know, the town of Smiths Falls leases Victoria Park from Parks Canada, and in turn, we have subletted the land to the Chamber of Commerce for many years to enable them to operate a campground. The campground is operated as a social enterprise and is a key piece in providing revenue to support their work with local businesses. Historically, the agreement's been one for the management of the park with a revenue and cost-sharing split. As well, the town had key responsibilities for the financial management of the operation as well as day-to-day maintenance. Parks Canada, the Chamber, and the town have met, and it's been made clear that Parks is asking campgrounds located on their waterways throughout the region to relocate in order for their land to be made more accessible for all of the public to enjoy. The Victoria Park Campground can continue to operate for the next 2 seasons in its current location, provided there is a 2-meter setback from the water created, and that's been done. So we have begun discussions with the Chamber about alternate locations for the campground after that 2-year period. So the newly drafted agreement is a lease-style agreement, which provides more control and ownership of the operation of the campground to the Chamber directly. It's a flat fee lease, and although there's a small net revenue loss to the town, expenses such as staff time were not factored into our historical expenses. And the new lease agreement greatly reduces town staff involvement, and it's felt that this arrangement will assist the Chamber in being more self-sufficient with their operations. The Chamber has endorsed this agreement and is ready to welcome their guests for the summer. Our recommendation today is that Council endorse the new lease agreement between the Smiths Falls and District Chamber of Commerce and the town of Smiths Falls.
Councillor Dwyer.
Thank you. Jennifer, I'm just looking for a point of clarity about the term of the lease arrangement, because I note on page 1 of the staff report, it talks about Parks Canada now being acceptable to extending it from 1 season to 2 season.
Mm-hmm.
And then on page 3 of the agreement, I'm not sure what page of the staff report that is, it talks about 3 additional 1-year leasing terms until the end of 2022.
So it is an agreement for 2 years till the end of 2020. Most lease agreements have a renewal clause, as does this one. So if all parties agree, that's the town, the Chamber, and Parks Canada, then it is renewable. That has been discussed with Parks Canada and the Chamber all in the same room. The idea, though, is to ensure that we're moving towards relocation. And so if we are well down the way of a relocation strategy for the campground, then Parks is willing to extend the agreement. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Councillor Alford.
Yes, I congratulate everyone involved in getting it to this point. And just to further what Councillor Dwyer said, because as I understood it, the original intent was that there, and perhaps it still is, that there be an exit strategy by the end of 2019. And while that may be somewhat extended past 2020, that was the original, and that's the plan we're staying with?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Brennan.
Thanks. I'm glad that to see that the campers have some surety. I see there's some there now, which is great. I think going forward, and I'm glad Councillor Dwyer brought up the termination clauses in the agreement in terms of any future years. I think we need to quantify because there's been a significant investment made in that park in terms of infrastructure, hydro and whatnot, and to duplicate that, I'd like to know what that is going to be costing. And so as we go forward, I think we should keep that on our radar, but I'm glad to see that that we have some surety for at least 2 more years. Great, thanks.
Mayor Panko?
You know, I too support the staff recommendation, and I think it just speaks to the benefit of negotiation and each giving a little bit and finding some new terms to the agreement. And in the end, it seems to be very, very favorable for both. And two, we look forward to, I guess, further discussions regarding the future of the park.
Any further questions or comments? Based on how I read the report, we're renting it for $10,000, but we incur about $11,000 in expenses. Is that correct?
Historically, that's what's happened. That doesn't factor in the staff time for maintenance or financial management. So if we did that, then I think the picture would be slightly different.
Okay. Would it be worth, if there's a financial constraint that leads to the $10,000 price that we're renting it, would it be better to rent it for the $11,000 so we get cost recovery and then encourage them to apply for a community grant for $1,000 just to get the full accounting of the situation documented?
I think that's a great suggestion. I think what is very positive about this agreement, and the Chamber agrees, is how straightforward it is. In our past agreements, there's been a lot of passing money back and forth and responsibilities. The idea was to keep this quite simple and straightforward, so that's where it was coming from.
Okay. Is it financial constraints that wouldn't allow them to pay the $11,000 or?
So can you explain your question?
So if it's costing us $11,000 for them to lease the space, why
That's the
wouldn't
net revenue.
Okay, that's the net
So
revenue that
it's-
comes in a
Yeah,
season.
that's the
Okay.
difference between revenue and expenses. So now the net revenue, is about $1,000 off based on this lease price, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. No further. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on then to 8B, Land Use Planning Service Sustainability Review Report. Director Costello.
Thank you. Realizing that we're already an hour in, I'll try to keep this as brief as possible and allow some time for questions. This is the Land Use Planning Service Sustainability Review. This was slated to be on the agenda about a month ago, but it was deferred. So that's why it's come before you this evening. So the purpose of the Service Sustainability Review is to systematically examine existing service delivery and develop options and strategies that will enable the town to match resources to services in the immediate and long-term future in a sustainable way. I think that's kind of the opening to all of our SSR reports. Planning Services is responsible for helping the community establish and implement its long-range community development plan and vision. Community planning promotes the goals of economic prosperity, community vitality, environmental responsibility, and enriched cultural identity in a way that reflects the community while respecting provincial policy. This is just a short review of the process. So this was started in July 2018. There was an interim report in August, as well as outreach to our comparator municipalities, team meetings. The report was finalized in March, and that's where we are this evening in May doing our final presentation to Council. So the comparators we picked were Arnprior, Renfrew, Carleton Place, and St. Mary's. We picked our comparators based on land area, private dwellings, and population. It's not easy to pick comparators for land use planning. There's no apples to apples comparison for this. So we used those three basic rationale for picking the comparators. So as you can see from the data, we used 2016 population data from Stats Canada. All of the ones we picked were within the same range in population as the town of Smiths Falls. We did use single tier and lower tier municipalities that you can see from the chart as well. So in order to do our service sustainability review, we looked at two areas of focus, one being the staffing levels in planning services. And to do that, we used comparator information. We did an audit and quantify staff's workload. We wanted to also use our new strategic, or our draft strategic plan and direction while doing this service review, and as well as look at any potential for revenue. The second feature or focus we wanted to look at was our planning fees, to see if we need to do an update of those fees. It's usually common practice to look at all municipal fees on an annual basis, but we wanted to make sure that our fees were comparable with our comparators, and that our fees cover the resources used to accomplish the task. And again, it's not an apples-to-apples comparison, as not all municipalities deal with the same planning issues that we do. Again, as I noted, we use some lower tier municipalities. In a lower tier, the county provides certain planning functions and services to local municipalities within the county. Using Lanark County as an example, they have the authority to approve consents, such severances, plans of subdivision, condominium, part lot control, OP amendments, as well as official plan 5-year reviews. In our municipality, that is all done by one full-time equivalent, which is our senior planner. So doing a quick audit audit of our planner's workload. So in 2018, this is a listing of some of the major accomplishments. This isn't the day-to-day inquiries or some of the applications that have come before council or come to our senior planner. We had the Canopy Warehouse expansion, restorative health, chiropractic, Phase 1 Bellamy, LeBoat, site plan approvals for projects initiated and processed in previous years, and that was Elmsley Street Apartments and the Rideau Hotel. We had Phase 1 of the parking study completed. Phase 2 closed there a month ago, I think, about a month ago. And as well, we've hosted a successful Heritage Symposium, which is an annual event. A typical day, as most of our staff deal with, is general inquiries, emails, phone calls, preliminary meetings that are normally pre-booked. Some show up on site, and our senior planner does take the time to meet with them. Pre-consultation, colleague consultation, application review, other miscellaneous tasks, committee work, and committee meetings. So the following studies and policy projects are slated for 2019 and 2020, and I don't think any of these are news to you. They've been discussed during budget deliberations and as well during our strategic planning sessions. We need to initiate a comprehensive zoning bylaw review to bring our zoning bylaw into conformity with our official plan. Phase 2 of the parking study, like I said, is underway. It should be awarded in the not too distant future. Parks and Rec Master Plan, affordable housing strategy, secondary plan for Lombard, as well as a secondary plan for the industrial park. So those are just some of the ones that we were able to determine. That doesn't count for any ones that are just going to occur throughout 2019, 2020. This is a slide I just added in today. Another item that's going to potentially add to workload for all planners is Bill 108. And it offers amendments to different pieces of legislation that impact the planning community. The Development Charges Act, the Local Planning Appeals Tribunal Act, Planning Ontario Heritage Act. Our senior planner will be conducting some further research, and I believe there's a planners meeting that he's attending, and he'll be preparing a comprehensive report for a future committee of the whole for all of you to look at regarding Bill 108. So apart from the day-to-day activities as well as policy development, our senior planner is also looking at doing some more administrative matters to get our website up and functioning for planning services and have all the applications that planning uses in a fillable PDF. As well, we'd like to do a review of the current fees and fee structure. I don't think that there's going to be much discussion about doing an annual review of our fees. We want to complete a new site plan control bylaw. As well, like I said, we want to update our planning section of the website, and the CIP will have to be reviewed this year as part of the monitoring program. Another object or another issue or item that our senior planner is going to be tasked with is all the direction and all the action items that are coming out of the town's strategic plan. Council discussed this a couple of months back, and currently it's in its draft form. One, we weren't building a diverse economy with a strong business sector. Planning will complement and enables economic development in two ways: policy development and establishing appropriate policies and rules to enable this development. We want to improve our financial position and create a healthy community with quality of life services for residents, all of which land use planning will have an imperative part in. We want to invest in our infrastructure and keep pace with needs. As the town evolves, proper long-range planning in collaboration with Public Works is important to guide where this growth is going to happen. Redevelop our waterfront and downtown. This is also going to be important for the planner to be involved with, especially with the redevelopment of the old water treatment plant and other potentially underutilized spaces near downtown. And preserve and enhance our heritage buildings and services. Our senior planner acts as the staff liaison for CIP committee, as well as the Planning Advisory Committee and the Municipal Heritage Committee. Offering a viable commuter transportation system, how and where this commuter transportation service is delivered will have impact on our land use planning department, as well as building stronger relationships with neighbors, attract new manufacturers and service industries, and a growth in population. So all of these that we have identified in our strategic plan will have some impact on our planning department. Also outlined in the strat plan were 6 new draft strategic priorities, the first being housing. We've identified that we're going to have to draft and develop a housing strategy, investigate planning tools to encourage the type of housing in demand, and possibly a development charges study, which is something that Council is going to have to discuss in more detail at a later date. Quality of life is also one of the priority, as well as the transportation networks, and within that we have the parking study, of which phase 2 is underway or will be underway shortly, and assisting with the development of a transportation master plan. Continued, we have the waterfront development, tourism, and town hall campus and square. So what we'd like to do is be able to keep a senior planner doing the more policy implemented tasks and more of the strategic directives that Council has put in place, and have somebody on staff who could do more of the administrative duties. Another thing that we wanted to look at was some revenue opportunity. There's a possibility, we already do have a shared service agreement in place with Montague Township. If the prospect of bringing on an administrative person, there could be the potential of entering into more consulting services for shared services for planning. That remains to be seen at this point, but it could potentially be a revenue opportunity that the town could look at. So the recommended action coming out of this is that with the number of special projects and policy development that is being planned for the upcoming years, that we believe it's imperative that a full-time equivalent be sought to provide daily assistance for planning applications, inquiries, and other administrative functions that currently our senior planner does by himself. One full-time equivalent would allow the incumbent senior planner to undertake the higher value work. This has already been included in the 2019 budget under planning services, and doing so would offset some costs that we would have to spend on having a contractor or consulting firm undertake some of the policy development and housing strategy that we have in store for 2019-2020. The other area we wanted to look at was planning fees and revenue. So currently, using some of our comparator information, you can see the revenue derived from Carleton Place was much greater than that of Arnprior and Smiths Falls. So we would like to undertake a comprehensive review of our planning fees to make sure that we're on par with our comparators and that we are recouping the costs that it's taking to provide this service. As you can see, those numbers are for 2017. The number for 2018 from Smiths Falls was provided, and it was $16,500. So we would like to see that revenue increased. Another potential revenue opportunity that I wanted to bring up, I didn't think that we should do a land use planning review without at least bringing up development charges. It's a one-time fee levied upon municipalities. This is something that's been bantered about by previous councils. It is a revenue opportunity, and if council is interested in this type of opportunity, then I think that that direction be given to staff for a comprehensive review be taken, and it would be something that would be consulted out to have the consultant do for the municipality. Just a quick look at development charges with comparator information. So in 2017, $677,000 was collected from the town of Arnprior. Over 700,000 in Carlton Place, and 77,000 in change was collected from the town of Renfrew. So just as a comparison, that's some revenue, could be revenue generating for the town of Smiths Falls. So closing summary for internal improvements, based on comparator information as well as workload, we feel that a full-time equivalent would provide our senior planner much needed assistance so he can focus on some higher level work. We feel that there should be a comprehensive review of our current fee structure and the fees, and we're going to do that, complete that annually. We'd like to provide a better understanding of the costs associated with each fee to ensure that we're covering our indirect and direct costs, same as which we do for planning or for building services currently. And so that's just a quick review. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Great, thank you, Director Costello. Councillor Alfred.
Not so much questions, but I will support this. I've long thought that we should be undertaking development charges, even if it is that we have development charges that we can waive as a way to entertain more development and building in Smiths Falls. With regard to another FTE for the planning department, just in microcosm, and this would be just a small example, but I'm also, Councilor Brett and I are both on the Planning Advisory Committee, and I know how much time that our senior planner spends photocopying, which doesn't seem, if he had admin support, I don't think that's something that a senior planner should be doing, and how higher value work would definitely what he should concentrate on. We're having this opportunity, given the boom that Smiths Falls is having, to take on work that we haven't had before and maybe undertake changes to policy that we should be looking at. We can now concentrate more time on. So, yes, I fully support this.
Thank you.
This report.
Councillor Dwyer.
Thank you. Carrie, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
The first is, you don't reference in the report what the nature of the FTE position would be.
Oh, my apologies. So the nature of the FTE would be more of a coordinating position. It wouldn't be a junior planner or such. It would be more of an administrative coordinator function. So they would be the first point of contact for day-to-day planning inquiries, including any public inquiries we get at the counter over the telephone, maybe some policy interpretation and pre-consultation. They would review and process applications as they come in and review any of the background information. Review development applications to ensure they are complete and compliant, prepare any key maps and notice circulations that do take quite a bit of time, assist with the coordination of public meetings, workshops, open houses, facilitate the development of a planning filing system and maintain it to meet administrative and legal requirements, gather any background information, pre-screens information, updates website and other social media.
Thank you. That's sufficient.
I was prepared.
I know. I should have cut you off about 6 points ago.
Okay.
No, that's great. Contract or permanent?
Permanent.
Okay. Okay. When I review the report, I'm sorry, I'm just going through all my notes. There's a couple general observations that I wanted to make. And I'll start by saying that I am, like Councillor Alfred, I am 100% on board on commissioning a DC study ASAP. If we can't make it work in this fiscal year, then my expectation is that we hit the ground running in 2020. I'm also supportive of the addition of an administrative coordinator to this role because, like Carl, I can appreciate how much administrative work comes with the nature of this role. It hasn't been that long ago that the department used to have a multiple staffing contingent, and I'm hoping that by given the staff drain, or talent drain rather, on planners in the area, I'm hoping that we will be very successful in recruiting for an administrative coordinator. So hopefully we can fill that sooner rather than later. I do have some mild concerns about the proposed cost recovery suggestions that come in the report, and it's based on the fact that when I look at the application numbers that we see a year, and I look at the number of new builds that we have, which I believe last year was 18, and granted, phase one of Bellamy Farms is coming online, but have we issued any foundation permits for that yet?
I can't say for certain. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. I'm concerned that with our low number of applications relative, that have been consistent with the number of applications that we've been receiving historically, that using the methodology that increasing your planning fees will help cost recover the service is just not achievable. Based on, and Janet's going to kill me, but I'm taking ballpark numbers out of the budget. I think our operating budget for planning was like $170,000, give or take. And the numbers that Carrie's report quotes as far as return on planning fees is 17. That puts us at a 10% operating recovery in planning fees. So to get that to a more achievable balance, I think we're setting ourselves up for failure, or we're going to get fees that are just so far out of whack with what would be regionally consistent. We're going to place ourselves out of the market.
I don't think it's going to happen overnight.
No, at all.
No.
I think when you look at a place like Carleton Place, whose revenue is what, $160,000 a year, they're operating closer at a 50-50 cost recovery, as most other municipalities in the area are. So I just want to be careful that we don't go into this thinking that by increasing our staffing contingent, we're going to be able to offset the cost of that by increasing our planning fees, because it's not going to happen. I mean, we'll improve, but we're just not at the capacity, the operating capacity right now, or the application capacity to make that economical. So I think we need to go into this knowing full well that there's a cost for delivering this service that's going to be absorbed by the taxpayer. And while part of me has the heebie-jeebies from that, I mean, that's also kind of the reality of working in a small town municipality where you just don't have the development that you need to be able to make it cost recoverable. I do wonder where we are in our cyclical building permit review for fees, because the Ontario Building Code Act does require that at some point we actually do almost a financial audit of our fees, and I'm wondering if it doesn't make sense to tie the building permit review fees into the planning fees and have a financial auditor come in and do both services at once.
That's a great point, and thank you for that information. That's appreciated. I will let you know that we are looking at our building bylaw this year. It's in CBO Sutherland's work plan to update the whole building bylaw as well as the fees. So they will be done with some concurrency.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. The only other point that I want to make is that I have a real concern that when you look at your slide, I don't know, Carrie, if you can go back to it, the one about the special projects.
The strategic priorities,
Yeah.
Councillor Dwyer?
Yeah, I think so. Is it your intention to see those all completed within the next sort of 12 months?
No.
4 years?
Yes, and
Okay.
there will be, CAO Morris will be providing more of a report to council on timelines, who the lead person
Okay.
is at a future committee of the whole.
Okay, and
Yes.
my last point on the special projects was that 3 of the projects you noted were actually budgeted or had intended to be completed by private consultants, chiefly being the zoning bylaw, the parking study, and the affordable housing strategy. So is it now realistic to think that that some of that work will be done in-house and there will be cost savings elsewhere in the budget?
So it just as a refresher, so there was $50,000 allocated for the zoning bylaw update.
Right.
There was $30,000 in our Parks and Rec master plan, and we had just over $30,000 budgeted for phase 2 of the parking study.
Right.
The hope is that some of the fees that we didn't budget for, such as the affordable housing strategy, some of those fees that our senior planner would be able to take on some of the more some of the roles of that. There is going to be some things that are out of budget if council decides to go forward with them in 2019. The hope is to lessen those costs as much as possible and have our senior planner do some of that work.
Okay, thank you. Like I said at the beginning, I'm supportive of the hiring of an administrative coordinator, and I would like to see the DC's project accelerated as quickly as possible.
And possibly, maybe we could flag that for the 2020 budget for a consultant for DCs.
All right, Mayor Panko.
Thank you, and a very comprehensive, complete job, and again, I support, I think most of the recommendations, or all the recommendations. When it comes to, my preference would be for special projects that we do them in-house. I think, Carl's probably the most capable of doing that rather than bringing an outside consultant in, and I also believe too that a planner's forte isn't necessarily doing some of the administrative duties that could be handled by another individual, and I know a lot of his time can be consumed with a lot of the stuff that could be done by an assistant. The planning fees, I don't think there's any expectation that it will ever be cost recovery, but I think any difference we can make there, as long as we're competitive, I think would be fair and suitable. And based on the demand we're seeing now for real estate, and especially on the resale of homes now, I think we fully expect the home builders will be catching up to demand. We will see a lot more construction in the near future. Development charges, I agree with Councillor Dwyer and Councillor Alford. I think it's something that, I think there's a long hesitancy to go there. I think some fear, reluctance that it would hold back development, and I think it's probably more of a fallacy than anything else. And I think certainly we're at the point now where, if you look at the principal reason to have them, we're at that point where we need to leverage that. So I support development charges study, and I think that was, I think that pretty much covers the point. So I think we have the recommendations across the board I support.
Thank you.
Councillor Brennan.
Thanks, Carrie. Great report. And I do support getting some help for Carl, and for a couple of reasons. One is he does a great job on the planning committee, for one. I come into the town hall, he's talking to people. He has time to, and really, he does a great job. He's a great people person. But we probably need another people person to give him a break and let him do some real tough planning, which he loves, I know. And the other part of that is, and you mentioned in your report about our shared service agreement with Montague, that may or may not create an opportunity for other neighbors that might want to participate with that. And I think in the view of that, coming down the road in years to come, I think we need to do more and more of that. And I think maybe there may become a day when we're told we're going to be doing more of that. So to be proactive on that front would be good. On the development charges study, I do support a development charges study. I look forward to it. I would be, when I see it or when it comes forward, whenever that is, I would be cautious about how much DCs are, and certainly not in line with Ottawa's, and even I've heard comments about Carleton places as well. So, but as a principle, I think it's sound to go there. So, all in all, I support your report. On the cost recovery, I agree with Councillor Dwyer. How effective is it? And I think there's other ways, i.e. shared service agreement, to recover costs. But overall, I support this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Allen.
I support this as well, and I sit on the Municipal Heritage Committee with Carl, and I know that we've talked a lot about having our website activated and so many different things, because we're doing a lot in the area of heritage right now in the town, and it would give Carl an opportunity to keep working with that good work and have someone else doing some of those administration kinds of activities. The other thing I wanted to ask, or I'm not sure if it's the right place to talk about, but some communities for developmental charges are also requiring a certain amount of social housing when developments happen. I mean, is that something that we've looked into or thought about?
To be honest, we haven't really delved into any type of
Will that be
DC
part of
or-
the study?
It would be part of the study and probably part of a report that would be brought forward. Oh, and sure, if Carl would like to speak to it. That would be, we could also bring that up when, we obviously put this, and I think there's consensus to add this to the 2020 budget. We can get a quote, but Carl can bring forward a report with some information on development charges before that as well. But Carl, if you have the answer to that, please.
Thank you, Councillor. Certainly, I don't want to speculate on some of the outcomes on the housing strategy that we're going to be looking to undertake, but one of the new tools that municipalities now have is inclusionary zoning, where municipalities have the ability to require a provision of affordable housing units within residential developments of a certain size. So that's a tool that's new to municipalities, and one that we can certainly be looking at over as we proceed with the affordable housing strategy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Alford. Councillor McKenna.
Just to speak in favor, and it was a very comprehensive review, and I appreciate all of the service reviews, another good one. I support it for the reasons that my colleagues have mentioned, but also I'm encouraged by the opportunity to rise up into the policy realm, to look 5-10 years down the line, and to get out of the weeds that the planner has to spend so much time. And I know it's a detailed position, but we really need that. I think the council would benefit from having that senior policy view 5-year, 10-year down the road, and take advantage of this opportunity we have right now. And I'll say again about rising, because that's really where we're going. So that whenever this growth levels off, which it will, we'll be in a much better place, not just from the growth, but we've looked ahead, planned for our future. And so I'm very supportive of the recommendation.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Thank you, Director Costello. I really enjoyed that. I've got one question. I'm a little confused, and it might just be because I didn't read things properly. We've got this big surplus from planning fees and development that we talked about, no?
That's building.
That's building.
Building.
Okay, and that can't be used for this kind of stuff?
No.
They're separate?
Separate.
Okay, that's too bad.
Yes, it is.
So on Councillor McKenna's comments, I agree that, things are they're booming right now. We're rising. Everything's great. I definitely don't think this level of growth is sustainable long term. And that's why I have a little bit of, I'm a little nervous if it's going to be a full-time position and we find that this level of growth drops off. 5 years ago, I know as a volunteer working pretty closely with the planning department, things were going pretty smoothly, it seemed. And obviously the nature of the sustainability service review is going to be what's happening right now, which I think is more of an anomaly than the long-term reality of what Smith Falls' long-term growth is going to look like. Mm-hmm. From your perspective, what's the advantage of making this a permanent position versus a contract position to feel things out?
Probably one of the top things that comes to mind is finding somebody when it's a more attractive advertisement when it's a full-time position than if it's a contract. I think with a full-time employment opportunity, I think we're going to get some very good candidates coming forward. It's hard to say. I believe a full-time is probably more attractive for people to apply to, and especially ones that have any type of planning education or planning degrees.
Okay, thank you. And if this, say in a worst-case scenario, the cannabis bubble pops and our development stagnates again, what kind of duties would this individual be responsible for in the case when the number of permits and the amount of business for the planning department slows down?
There'd be a number of options. We would always, look if we had to find another opportunity within the department. There's always something we can do, and maybe I can think more about that and send council an email or update council, but there would be opportunities to provide them with some type of other duties. either within corporate services or otherwise. And we do, potentially have people who are retiring in the not-too-distant future either, so there could be some succession planning as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'd love to get more information on the
Certainly.
cost-benefit analysis and any kind of value to the taxpayer that it'll bring.
Certainly.
Any further questions, comments? No?
So
Okay.
I will do my best to try to get a Carl 2.0 for planning coordinator. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Director Costello. Moving on to 8C, award of contract for construction project management services report 2019-65. Director Manhire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What we're looking for this evening is awarding of the contract for construction project management for this Phase 2 of Town Hall renovation. The architects are currently, and engineers are currently putting together the design and the tender for this project, and we'd like to have the contract manager on board in order to review that piece once it's available. So we're looking to award the tender that was issued, Community Services Tender 03, entitled Construction Project Manager, to be awarded to Colliers Project Leaders in the amount of $59,063 plus non-refundable HST for a total of $60,102.51. And further, that this award be conditional on successful negotiation between Colliers and the corporation of the town, so that we can find the right person to lead the project.
Thank you, Director Manhire. Councillor Dwyer.
Thank you. All right, it's always exciting to see a tender come in on budget. That's
Yes.
That is fantastic. I was a little disappointed, though, that we only got one bid again. Any commentary on why that may be? Are we late to tender again? Everybody's all full up? Buildings just going gangbusters?
Through the chair, there's a couple of different, we had 4 packages picked up. It's not unusual to not get all of those back. It's a relatively small job when you look at this. Colliers right now is, their other projects are the LRT in Ottawa. So they're talking about, significantly larger projects. The budget for this one is approximately $1.9 million. So that may account for some of the uptake.
All right, Councillor McKenna.
I'm supportive of the recommendation. We'd like to move forward. I've had the opportunity to work with Collier's project manager on several projects in the last 15 years, and they've been delivered in spades over that period to our organization. So the reputation is solid. So
Good to know. Thank you.
good luck.
Any further questions or comments? I have one comment, or just not really related to the tender, but it came up when somebody was reading the agenda and I didn't know the answer. Will this cover making the upstairs council chamber accessible?
No, this is Phase 2. So Phase 2 is the middle section of the building that was built in the 80s, includes the fire hall and service areas, as well as the building services component, which is the area that finance currently occupies in the north building.
And Phase 3 will...
The next phase will be council chambers and this building here.
Which is expected by...
Next year.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Panko.
Yeah, I too support the recommendation, and I guess just for the public's understanding, we've got projects of this scope. I think it wouldn't be reasonable to assume staff would either have the time on top of all the other responsibilities and probably, no disrespect, or the expertise in this area to manage a project of this size. So I think it's just a very responsible decision and recommendation from staff and council to make sure we have the expertise on board and ensure Director Manhire has the ability to continue on with all those other responsibilities.
The project manager will report through me and will act on behalf of the town. We'll still maintain signing authorities and all the rest of those, but through the chair again, we have 18 different capital projects that we're doing this year. So all the help we can get is appreciated.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Director Manhire. Seeing consensus around the table, we'll support the recommendation and move on to Item D, Community Improvement Plan Amendment, 7 Russell Street West. That's the Davidson's Courtyard Shops. Senior Planner Carl Grenke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to provide a very brief overview, the Community Improvement Plan is it's a plan that the town has had and certainly served well by over the last number of years, where we offer shared incentives to facilitate certain developments, facade improvements, interior renovations, all with the goal of improving the value and building stock of our downtown core. So this report here pertains to a proposed amendment to an agreement. It was adopted by bylaw in 2016, and so if there's the intent of a scope change, then that would need to be approved by council. So this relates to the Davidson's Courtyard property, which is on Russell Street West, and council had approved funding under programs 1 and 2 to accommodate interior and exterior improvements to that property, and a significant part of that went to assist Cafe Women opening, and most of our community improvement grant approvals come attached with a funding agreement that spells out what needs to be done and when, and itemizes costs and particular projects that need to be completed before the town can release the money that's been approved, and we don't release until we have the receipt, so we can match the costs. So most of our community improvement grant costs are matching funds. So so under program 1, for instance, if we're approving $20,000 in improvements to a facade, then the proponent would only be able to get matching funds up to $10,000 from the town. So with respect to the Davidson's Courtyard project, and we had released 60% of the approved funds back in well, the release happened in 2017, but we'd approved the funds in 2016. However, we couldn't release the full funds since a few of the projects the items hadn't been completed. So that included a veranda, included awnings, and a Juliet balcony over a second floor apartment. So when the newly constituted CIP evaluation committee met in early January, we were looking at some of these projects for which funds had been approved but not dispersed. The CIP committee wanted to ensure they felt the best value for the town was when we actually fund completed and attractive projects. So one of the items that they identified was this one here. We reached out to the proponents and engaged in a conversation with them. So they determined that one of the items that they were looking for, the veranda, was no longer commercially viable, so they didn't wish to complete it. However, they were prepared to do some improvements to the rear facade facing William Street around the Hotel Rideau parking lot. Normally, the community improvement plan doesn't fund facade improvements that face the rear of a property unless the rear of the property faces a public space or publicly accessible space. So the proponents made the request to the committee along those lines, and the CIP committee agreed that the new Hotel Rideau development opens up an opportunity here. So what the Community Improvement Plan Committee passed a resolution supporting the revision of the scope of the original agreement, whereby they would remove the construction of the veranda over the southern deck, but instead they would undertake some improvements to the rear, including wooden trimming over create a false window, cover up the rather unsightly particle board that faces the parking lot, and also improve some of the masonry facing the Hotel Rideau parking lot. And they would still go through finish the balcony and the awnings. So there's no budgetary impact here. They're not requesting any additional money. They're just looking to change the scope of what was approved in order to get the rest of the funding, so it could be up to $4,000 depending on receipts, get the rest of the funding that was originally approved back in 2014 or 2016. So the committee, the CIP committee considered that application. They feel it's the changes provide good value to the proponents and to the town. And I think it also speaks to one of those items that's come up a few times as we move through CAP projects. And when you're working on renovating old buildings, things change, surprises happen. Sometimes you find something that you weren't expecting, and a lot of the time the overall scope does change. So certainly a renovation or an evolution as envisioned here is not beyond the realm. It certainly is reasonable and can be expected. So the recommendation of the CIP committee is to authorize the execution of an amended funding agreement with the scope change as outlined in the report and the committee's motion.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Granke. Councillor Allen.
Yes, I'm in full support of this. I think now that parking lot is exposed, I was walking by there the other evening, and you can see why they would want to do that at the back of the property. And I think Lynn and Scott are really a poster business or community or CIP grant recipient because of what they've done in that building. I mean, it had been started with previous owner, but they were highlighted at our Municipal Heritage Committee and have done an incredible job of making that building accessible and beautiful. So I think it's just makes sense for us to give them the money to do it at the back rather than the other. It's really just replacing the money that they were already entitled to for one project to the other. I'm in full support of that. I think this is a great program. I'm so happy we have it.
All right, Councillor Dwyer.
Thank you. I'm in full support. No further comment.
All right. Yeah, great work on behalf of the committee and Mr. Granke and the owners. And I think it's really great to show that there's flexibility behind the community improvement plan as a project evolves. So thank you. And we will move on to E, right of entry bylaw information report. Director Costello.
Thank you. So as per Council's direction, bring this report forward to all of you this evening for review. I believe Councillor Alfred had brought this up at a previous committee of the whole, and Council asked staff to come back with a report. So as you can see, the recommendation this evening is not to proceed with a right of entry bylaw. The report does outline some of the pros as well as the cons of implementing such a bylaw. So a right of entry bylaw establishes a process that would allow the town to grant entry of a property by an individual onto a neighboring property, even if the adjoining neighbor objects. The bylaw would enable property owners to make repairs and alterations to existing buildings, fences, or structures that could only be made by accessing their neighbor's lands. So access is limited to the land. It's not, there's no access to any buildings within the lands. So during my research, I did look, and there are other means to get around this in what in most cases is a civil issue. There can be consent through mutual agreement. So this would occur if the neighbor approached the neighbor and there was a mutual agreement between the two. There is an easement agreement that could be entered into. There's a court order, or there is a right of entry bylaw. So there are other means for somebody to have right of entry onto their neighbor's property. I did want to look into some of the rationale if we did implement such a bylaw, how would that transpire? And I used the City of Toronto kind of as my guide. So if council did choose to implement a right-of-way bylaw, we would have to implement some strict conditions or guidelines. They're listed in the report. I don't want to go over all of them, but one that I meant to put in the report, though I noticed it wasn't, and I thank Councillor Dwyer for bringing it to my attention. The applicant would also have to have an insurance policy, a liability policy with the town named as an additional insured, anywhere from a $2 million to $5 million coverage on that. The power of entry bylaw would not authorize entry into a building, the use of the adjoining land for any other work other than that outlined in the permit, storage of materials, or any exemption to any person for complying with other town bylaws. If enacted, the town would highly recommend that we have a substantial deposit in place, anywhere from $500 to $2,000, depending on the impact of the work. So I did go into defining some of the examples of what low impact and high impact work would be that would have to be part of the bylaw, and that would determine what the permit deposit fee would be. Staff feel that a significant and ongoing challenge with the right of entry bylaw is that it actively involves the town in matters of dispute that are otherwise entirely private, as stated before, a civil matter. Pursuing access via the right of entry permit process is an indication that a neighbor has not given consent to the property owner to enter. Therefore, it is believed that the process almost always would involve an acrimonious relationship between two property owners. Administering for a permit, if council chooses to go this route, it would be very resource intensive, keeping in mind that we have one person in our building department currently. There would have to be circulation and intake at the staff level. The chief building official would have to do a review and site inspection, as well as initial assessment. The whole outline of the work is listed in the report. I don't want to go through it all. To staff's knowledge, we've only had one request of this nature. We find that the process would be quite complex, would be a significant drain on town resources to facilitate and enforce matters to what we believe is two private parties involved. Due to the complicated and adversarial nature of the process, staff foresee some right of entry permits as requiring legal services and senior management involvement. The involvement of legal services can be required to provide assistance in interpretation of the bylaw and determining the applicability of the bylaw as part of the permitting process. Advice of this nature would be required when it is not readily apparent if the scope, process, work fits within the intent of the bylaw. So I do have a summary of the challenges. I do believe that the administration and the enforcement of the bylaw would consume a significant amount of staff time. Bylaw to facilitate matters that we believe are as a civil issue. We believe the process is complicated and would require a significant amount of direction from legal services and senior management. As well, we believe that by involving the town, that it exposes the town to risks of litigation, and authorizing access to a property owner can result into the neighboring property owner's feeling of disempowerment. Even if the permit fees were imposed to reflect cost recovery, the town's exposure to litigation and associated legal expenses would remain. So in summation, that is why we are not recommending that the town pass a right of entry bylaw.
All right, thank you, Director Costello. Councillor Brennan.
This is a great report to a good question, and I fully support your recommendation. As I commented the last time, I always thought this is more of a civil legal matter. We don't want to go down this road. Not only does it create problems for us in terms of administering it, but the key line there is we would be at risk for litigation because it really is a legal thing, in my view. So I support your recommendation.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Brennan. Mayor Panko.
Thanks, Kerry. A very comprehensive report, and I mean, I agree with Councillor Brennan. I mean, we've had one, I guess, issue that's come to our attention, and I think it just speaks to the fact that most people are neighborly. Most people can find a way to work through their differences, and especially when you figure the number of properties in town that would have a building would be very close to a lot line. You think of these homes been here, many for well over 100 years, how many times have windows been replaced and siding put on and brick repaired and roofs done, and many times you would have a neighbor needing to encroach onto a neighbor's property in order to do that. So I think it just speaks to the fact that 999 times out of 1,000, this tends to work its way out. And it's unfortunate that it's come here. I support the recommendation. I wish it didn't have to really consume the time it's consumed with the staff. But in the end, I agree, as Councillor Brennan says, it's really a civil matter. And I hope in this situation and future ones that people can be neighborly and find a way to make it work out.
Councillor Alford.
Yeah, I've struggled a little bit with this one because I can sympathize with any homeowner's frustration if they're not able to access their own building. So while I have a great deal of empathy for that, I also agree with staff that this body is charged with protecting the municipality, and I do see this as a civil matter. I don't think all of the civil paths have maybe been exhausted as yet, and I do support the fact that we not move forward with a right of entry bylaw, and I don't think it's right to put the municipality or the municipal staff in jeopardy on a couple of different fronts. So I will endorse the support, or I support the staff's recommendation.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Director Costello. Seeing consensus around the horseshoe, I think we can move on to F, refreshment vehicle annual fee report.
Thank you. So first and foremost, I want to give a shout out to Sam Rollins, who's in attendance this evening. He was a 2-week placement from St. Lawrence College, and he did some of the research on this report, and he came tonight to see what the outcome would be. So I truly appreciate that. Thank you. So as council is aware, we received a correspondence item asking for a reduced fee for an annual permit for refreshment vehicles. Staff undertook some research, or Sam undertook some research, and looked at some costs associated with refreshment vehicles in other municipalities. So the rationale for the annual fee, as previous councils have discussed, is mostly a cost recovery for the inspections of both our fire prevention and our chief building official. There's also cost recovery for our planner, who has to ensure that that it coordinates with the zone provisions, because refreshment vehicles are only allowed in certain zones. As well, as you all are aware, once the location is determined, it has to come forward to all of you to approve the location. As well, for refreshment vehicles, owners typically pay rent to the landowner and do not pay property taxes. For those reasons, previous councils have always had an annual fee for refreshments vehicles. Anywhere in 2010 in the report, it was $350. From 2014 to 17, it was raised to $500. And then 2018, when we refreshed our fees by law, it was increased to $600. So upon receipt of the correspondence item, we did look at, I reached out to both our building official and fire prevention officer to get their opinion on a reduced fee. And to that end, both the CBO and FPO did agree that an annual fee with applicants who were simply renewing are less labor intensive than the first application fee for the previous year. So to that end, we did look at if council was to reduce the fee, that we would allow it only in certain circumstances. The first being the applicant would pay in full the licensing fees for their primary inspection, so their first inspection at the location would be $600. So ones that have already been established would be the reduced fee. Any major renovations or upgrades to the refreshment vehicle that did not occur within the year, so if they did have major renovations, they would be charged the annual fee, not the reduced fee. There would have to be sign-off by both the fire prevention and chief building official on the annual inspection. Any major upgrades to kitchen equipment that did not occur within the year, they would also be paying the full, the annual fee. Applicants cannot relocate during the year. The reduced fee would only pertain when both the property owners and the applicant have no outstanding accounts, i.e. invoices, taxes, water, permit fees, etc., or outstanding work orders with the corporation. The reduced fee would pertain to motorized refreshment vehicles only, and any other provisions of the refreshment vehicles would apply. So we are recommending that there would be a reduction in the annual fee as long as all of these criteria are met. We're looking at the possibility of reducing the fee anywhere between $200 to $300 as cost recovery. I think I did recommend $200 in the report. That's the recommendation, or council can choose to keep it as a $600 annual fee. as well, just to bring to council's attention, and it was a directive by council to do some research on fees implemented by other municipalities, and Sam undertook this review. None of which I looked at had or they were all annual fees, but none had a reduced fee after they had been established. So as you can see, Carlton Place has an annual fee of $525, plus a non-refundable application fee and a non-refundable application for first-time applicants. Perth has something similar, but they also have an additional fee if you're located within the DBA area. Tay Valley is $300. Mississippi Mills is an annual fee of $750. Smiths Falls is $600. Rideau Lakes, again, is annual, and it's $306. And then when you get into some of the bigger, they actually have monthly fees, which is denoted with the City of Kingston. So they all do have annual fees. So we seem to be in the range with our 600, but we can recommend a reduced fee for annual licenses for establishments that were already pre-approved in their location and meet the criteria outlined in the report.
Thank you, Director Costello. Councillor Dwyer.
Thank you. I'm in agreement with Carrie's recommendation. I have no problem with it. I did think it was interesting, however, that Arnprior had a monthly fee of $62.50 because I feel like that works out to being closer at the end of the day to what our annual replacement fee is. So for that reason, I have no concern supporting a $200 annual fee. I think that's fair.
Councillor McGenna.
Thank you, Director Costello. It's a good report. I support the reduction as well. Just the criteria you're using to reduce the fee would only apply under the following circumstances. Mm-hmm. Is that a lot of work, or is that work happening already, or in order to get a reduced fee, staff are going to have to do a lot more work?
I think upon receipt of the application, they would still have to apply every year.
Okay.
Many of these points could easily be checked off by the FPO or CBO. As soon as they walk in, they can tell if there's any major upgrades. They can tell if there's any major kitchen upgrades. And for the most part, when it's a return applicant, as FPO Normanton stated, they have everything ready for them. So I don't see any of these conditions as being labor intensive.
So you can see where I was going. In
Yes.
order to get a reduced fee, you've
Yes.
added a bit of a pain to the staff, so
Yeah.
that's
No.
not the case. Okay,
No.
great.
All right, Councillor Alford.
Both Councillor Brennan and I sit on the chamber, and when we told them that we had asked for this kind of report, their comments, and correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Brennan, but they were concerned that these are competition for some of their own products, their own restaurants and things, and they don't pay property tax as well. Our brick and mortar businesses do. So I don't know if I want to reduce it or even reduce it by that much, given what our business community has voiced to it. I'm just going to sit with it for a few minutes.
Mayor Panko.
Sure. No, I support the staff recommendation, and I mean, it's a fee is supposed to be based on cost recovery, and once they're through it the first time, it's a pretty simple, straightforward process in future years, so I support the reduction.
Councillor Brennan.
Yeah, I understand what I heard at the chamber, and I also read the letter that we got. And, you know, I struggle with this a little bit because I guess you could argue if you're renting your establishment in downtown or wherever, you're paying a DBA fee. You're not paying property tax, you're paying DBA, or if you're renting it somewhere else, you're paying a business tax or something. So there is cost involved. I tend to support staff's recommendation, though, because in the long term, most of these these businesses, food trucks and chip wags, they just operate seasonally, and it's not like they're doing it all year long. So they have a limited amount of time to make money and make a living. And I guess you could put forward that an established restaurant is not or a food truck, with all due respect, it is excellent food, as I love it. It's not the same sort of experience that people look for. This is if you're driving around and you want to get some fries and go in the backwoods to eat them so no one sees you, like I do. So I'm gonna support staff's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Brennan. Any other questions or comments? I'm wondering if, sorry,
No, go ahead.
if you have a food truck, it's going to be parked on a lot. That lot's paying property taxes. What happens if a food truck wants to park in park space or public land?
Any locations for a refreshment vehicle have to be approved by council.
And is there a precedent for having a rental fee for when they're used in those locations?
In a park setting,
Yeah, say municipal land.
I don't think, well, unless they have permission by Director Manhire, I don't think they're permitted in parkland. Am I wrong, Director Manhire? Yes. So they have to
Okay.
be granted permission to do so.
So bottom line, somebody's paying property taxes associated with, okay. So based on that, I'm definitely comfortable, and I think I see consensus.
If
Councillor.
I could get direction on just one further point, in the recommended action, it outlines that anybody who is paid the $600 to get up and started for the 2019 year, I wanted council's direction on whether the remaining, if they've paid the full amount, if the remaining could be sent back to them, the 400, if they paid 600, if the 400 can be paid back. I think there's two.
Okay, I'm seeing consensus around the horseshoe for that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Director Costello. Moving on to item G, Assessment and Property Tax Consulting Services Report, CAO Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The rapid growth in the cannabis space and the diversity of cannabis facilities has created a delicious dilemma for MPAC in terms of identifying how they assess the value of the property and the buildings on that property, as well as which tax classification it fits into. Traditionally, a soap factory is a soap factory, regardless of where it is. It's probably industrial. In this case, we have different kinds of soap, so to speak. We have the facility like the one here in town that is enclosed and largely a pharmaceutical type industrial processing facility. And then in other parts you have an open greenhouse that might more appropriately fit into a rural or a residential tax classification, or perhaps a farm tax classification. I'll just remind committee that the farm tax classification is 1/4 of the residential, which is about 1/10 of the industrial. That's a significant difference. So, we've reached out to MPAC, and one of the catalysts for reaching out was the stakeholder newsletter that they released in April. And you can see it's more of a discussion document about how they're approaching from a methodology point of view and a tax classification point of view. And it occurred to us that we should be part of that discussion in a very proactive way. We've had experiences where we've appealed assessments after the fact. That's a confrontational and usually less than satisfying process. So we feel we need to get in on the ground floor. I think we have a captive audience with MPAC. We've had discussions about this particular issue already. It seems they want to move reasonably quickly, which is good. Our budget contains certain assumptions about growth in assessed value at that facility this year. So all this is to say that we don't have the expertise in-house to speak the language of MPAC and work with them and devote the time to make sure that this is done properly, and the distinction between the industrial type facility and the greenhouse is clearly made. So on that note, we'd like to bring in a consultant to help us with this. It's a company called CY Nell Consulting. Ms. Nell has extensive experience in this area. Most recently, she was the VP of Municipal and Stakeholder Relations at MPAC. She understands how MPAC works, and I would submit a small portion of the population understand that. So, the recommendation is to bring her in. It's an hourly rate. The hourly rate that she has proposed is entirely consistent with what we've paid other assessment consultants. We had one that worked on an appeal. It was the exact same rate, and we can accommodate it within the 2019 approved budget.
All right,
I
thank
would be
you,
happy to
sir.
answer any questions.
Mayor Benko.
Thank you, Sierra Morris. Absolutely critical move. I mean, you know, if there isn't a community anywhere in the country that is going to be more impacted by this type of interpretation than Smiths Falls, and especially at a time when I think so much of our industrial park is being consumed by one business. I think it's absolutely essential that MPAC get it right. And I thank you for reaching out and finding someone who's got the experience and the wisdom, the credibility, and the insight that can absolutely represent us appropriately in this discussion, and being proactive and getting to the table before MPAC makes a decision, I think is also critically important here. So there's a lot of money in the line. It's important to get it right. And we look at a facility which has everything from the grow rooms to HR to customer care to laboratories to processing. I mean, it's such a broad range of activities that happen within the facilities over there. This is very good timing. So thank you. I support the recommendation.
All right, Councillor Alford.
I'm going to echo part of what Mayor Panko said. I'm not sure that would have, without you flagging this, I'm not sure that would have occurred to me that it was possible that it would be anything but what I was expecting. So I more than support this. We definitely have to get this part right.
All right, I'm seeing consensus around the horseshoe, and I know from my Facebook days that there's a small army of MPAC subject experts on Facebook, and I'd like to commend CEO Morris for looking outside the box and finding somebody highly qualified to serve us in this role, so thank you. Moving on to H, regulate smoking and vaping in public places and enclosed workplaces report. Director Costello.
Thank you. I'm recommending this evening that Council review the report and give us direction to bring forward a bylaw to Council to regulate smoking and vaping in public places. So the report outlines kind of the history of where we've been with the Cannabis Act. I won't go over that, but the town currently has 4 bylaws in place for tobacco. They were passed anywhere ranging from 2002 to 2012, and they restrict smoking in municipally owned facilities, within 9 meters of public entrances to municipally owned facilities, regulate smoking in public places, and regulate smoking in public places was amended to include a set fine. So currently all 4 of these bylaws denote tobacco only and need to be updated to reflect cannabis and vaping. So the proposed bylaw that is attached to your package takes into account all the requirements under the Smoke Free Act, and as well also adds some additional requirements where we specified parks so that there's no confusion with recreation facilities and sports fields, outdoor meeting area, and this is added for areas that are under the town's control but not necessarily a park, and we're thinking ahead to potentially our town square area. Within 9 meters of any entrance or exit to the municipal building, within 3 meters of an entrance or exit to an enclosed workplace or enclosed public place. So we're looking to replace all 4 of those bylaws with the draft bylaw that is attached to your package. We're also looking at keeping the set fine as it is right now at $300 for our smoking bylaws. We're looking at keeping it the same, but as you all know, we do have to apply to the Ontario Court of Justice to have those approved. So this bylaw would be enforced by the Leeds Lanark District Health Unit, their tobacco enforcement team, as well as the town bylaw enforcement officers and the Smiths Falls Police Service. The health unit has 3 tobacco enforcement officers on staff who would be the primary resource, and that would be complemented by our bylaw enforcement officers as well as the Smiths Falls Police Service. So it's being recommended this evening that council pass a bylaw to regulate smoking and vaping in public places and enclosed work places. And I will take any questions you have.
Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, I support it. It's a lot of just due diligence with the change in the cannabis legislation. My question is, in the enforcement presently for the Ontario Smoking Act, do our police enforce that? Or is
Right
that
now, it's the same enforcement. Right
It's the
now,
same enforcement?
Yep, right
Okay.
now, it's primarily the health unit who enforces.
Yeah.
And our bylaw enforcement. Now, on items that are after hours or at a ballpark during the evening, the police will enforce that.
And is the enforcement by and large complaint driven?
Yes,
or is
right,
it
currently,
proactive?
yes.
It is?
And I would think that we would go down the same path as we did with the tobacco bylaws and do a form of public education before we do some set fines.
Great.
There is going to be a waiting period between when we apply for set fines and when they're approved, so we could probably do that little bit of an educational campaign during that time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McKenna.
Thank you for the report. Got a great email from Mel Hendershaw from Smiths Falls, advocate for local residential hospice, and there is a burgeoning hospice in development for our community. His question was really about end of life. Hospice is unique. Person might live there 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and if on medicinal marijuana or cannabis, or medicinal, maybe vaping, and so I would caution us at least to do a little more research into that. I was interested in approaching the Ontario Hospice Association to see what other municipalities have done around end-of-life care and pain management. It may be that there could be some exceptions to that for that group of people who are, it may be one of the few reliefs they have at the end of their life. So I don't know that for a fact, but he's flagged it, and I'm willing to do just a little more look into that one particular area.
Certainly, and I'll look into that, and I will note that this is for recreational and medicinal.
Yes.
But I certainly don't mind doing some research on that. There's no immediate rush. If council wishes, I can get that and bring it forward to you, and we can pass it at the next available council meeting.
And if I can help, I'll do everything.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
That's a great point. Thank you, Councillor McKenna. Mayor Panko.
Thanks, Gary. I think the town made a very progressive move in 2012 when we introduced this in support of the smoking bylaw. One thing I guess we were somewhat, I think I was, and probably most people, wondering what was going to happen on October 17th. We're going to start seeing people smoking joints, smoking cannabis everywhere, and the reality is I don't think I've seen anybody outside doing it. And I think the intention of the original smoking bylaw was really protection of children, and I think this continues with that whole rationale. Understanding that if people choose to consume cannabis, especially if we have sort of those curious cannabis tourists who come into town and go to the Tweed facility and eventually can buy product here, they can still be on a sidewalk or on a roadway in certain places. So it doesn't completely eliminate their ability to consume in a public place if they choose to, but certainly in areas, especially where children congregate, it does provide that protection. So I support the recommendation.
Thank you.
Councillor Alford.
I support the recommendation, but I too was curious as to if we have a vibrant cannabis tourism, will they just be allowed on sidewalks in? I don't know that we've made any plans for that as yet, but we want to be welcoming to that segment too. And this just all sounds like no. So I think we'll at some point then discuss where the yeses are for tourists of that nature.
So many of the clauses that within this report and form most of the bylaw are already provincial requirements under the Smoke-Free Ontario Act. Those are something we can't change. But
I
your
understand
point- your
that.
point's
It's
well
just,
taken.
yeah, I support the recommendations. I just, as an aside, all this is great and I agree with it, but if we're looking forward to a vibrant cannabis tourist industry, then we have to make place for them too.
Councillor Dwyer.
I fully support the amendment, and I'm glad to see that all the bylaws are consolidated into one.
Excellent. Seeing consensus around the horseshoe, I think we can approve the recommendation and move on to item I, appointments to boards and committees. Deputy Clerk Bennett.
Good evening. I'm here tonight to request council support to bring forward a resolution to appoint some members to various boards and committees. I'm happy to announce that we received another application for the Heritage House Advisory Board, and that Arnell W. Padmore would like to be part of that board. We also received applications from Jim Pavir, David White, Ron Stronsky, Gordon Giff, Jack Anderson, Renee Holbrook, I hope I'm saying that correctly, and they would like to be appointed to the Sports and Recreation Hall of Fame. And the last application, with the recent resignation from Stan Suffel from the Planning Advisory Committee, I'm requesting that council support bringing forward a resolution to appoint Mr. William J. Curry to this committee. So if council is supportive, we'll bring forward a resolution to the next meeting of council.
Councillor Brennan.
I support the recommendations and welcome Arnell back to the Heritage House Museum Board. And now that Councillor Allen's going to be joining us, we'll have a great board. And on the planning side, we had several people interested. I want to welcome back Bill Curry because when we adjusted the Planning Advisory Committee after the election, there were less public seats than there were available. So with Stan resigning, then that, opened a chair up, and I'm happy to see Bill still interested because he was before. There just wasn't a spot for him, so he's back. So happy to see that.
All right, thank you, Councillor Brennan. Seeing consensus around the table, I think we can go forward.
Thank you.
And move on in the home stretch of item J, Beckwith Street redevelopment. And Director Dunlop will lead the conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a recap of our last meeting on the topic. On May 6th at the Committee of the Whole, we presented report number 2019-059. The intent of that report was to discuss the Beckwith Street Phase 1, in particular options moving forward. That report identified a three-part recommendation that was presented to committee. The first part of that recommendation was to accept an offer from Ottawa Greenbelt to extend the validity of their bid for 120 days. That would essentially take their current bid through to what would be August the 11th of 2019. The second point was to enter into non-binding discussions with Ottawa Greenbelt Construction Limited concerning proposed options for Beckwith Street. And the third part of the recommendation presented that evening was to direct staff to enter into discussions with the downtown business community to consider implication of a future rollout beyond the summer of 2019. So those were the recommendations that were brought forward at that meeting. A decision yet to be brought forward.
Councillor McKenna.
I spoke in favor of the recommendation the last time, and I think the added layer of our due diligence by reviewing legal advice or seeking that was added value to my and supported my original thought of. So I'm glad we did that extra layer of due diligence, and so I'm still in the position of supporting those three recommendations that you brought forward.
Mayor Panko.
I support the recommendation as well. Again, I think there's not a lot of risk to at least seeing what is out there, what the possibilities are in negotiating with Ottawa Greenbelt. We know that we've got some money in the bank right now in the form of a government grant of $933,000 for in-ground work. So if there's an opportunity to leverage that and utilize that within the calendar year to get work done. Ultimately, any decision that comes back, any recommendation from staff will come back here for a decision. And so if there's success within negotiations, then it will be up to council to decide what we proceed with or don't proceed with this year. But this does provide the opportunity to at least see if there is an avenue forward, at least for a portion of the work within 2019.
Councillor Alfred.
Yes, I'll support the recommendations as Troy presented last week. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Councillor Dwyer.
Thank you. Is it possible to split the recommendation in parts? And I'd look to Deputy Clerk Bennett.
I actually want to maybe defer that to CO Morris, just from further comment.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, yes, please.
The first and second one are aligned.
Right.
But certainly the third one could be separated.
Thank you.
And done differently.
So I would like to suggest that we split it into two, being the first and second paired, and then the third. I am fully supportive of council directing staff to enter into negotiations and discussions with the downtown businesses, and I would like to think that we have already been doing this. But if we need a recommendation from council to do so, then I'm fully supportive of that. Unlike my counterparts around the table, I do not have a great degree of confidence in extending the offer, mostly because I continue to be concerned that if we are unsuccessful in negotiating with Ottawa Greenbelt at this time, that it hinders our ability to quickly move again to tender this year. And for those reasons, I will not be supporting this recommendation.
Any further questions or comments? Oh, sorry, Councillor Brennan.
Well, that's, I agree with Councillor Dwyer. I have discomfort with this, and I'm not comfortable. And it's not clear to me what the scope of work changes are going to be, the timing, and that sort of thing. I would much prefer us see go and try to get an extension on the OCIF funding. I think that could happen. It's perfectly reasonable given the situation we're in, and I do support. I think we should piece out a resolution that we direct staff to enter in discussions with our business community. I would furthermore like to see some type of public meeting forum to discuss with the people of this town this project, as I said before. And so it seems to me that from what I'm hearing around the table, we'll be doing 120 days, which I'm not going to support, but I do support consultations with whoever wants to talk about it.
Councillor McKenna.
Just on the DBA, because we have representatives there, is that we're already formally, isn't that our formal link into the, and that's been the main topic of discussion, or it had been? I'm looking to the representative on the DBA.
Councillor Alfred.
To give, I thought we were doing that, but maybe it's.
Okay, so and again, I'm not the chair of the DBA. Michelle Bately is the chair of the DBA. But I can share that for the last 2.5 months, the construction committee has been in planning for a communications piece with all of our downtown members, our downtown business members. And one date had been set for a public meeting to engage all of those people with what the plans were for on a multitude of levels. That, as I said, has been ongoing for nearly 3 months now. We pressed pause on that when we reject the tender. So with going forward with that public meeting, the work of getting ready to help all our business our downtown members to get through the construction is still very front of mind for DBA, and they are still putting those plans in place. It has not been rolled out to the business community yet. That was going to be done on April 30th, and as I said, because of what transpired, that's sort of on pause. The work continues, but the rollout is on pause till the DBA knew more. I hope that's of some help.
All right, thank you. Any further questions or comments? Director Dunlop, I have a question on the capacity for putting getting the underground work done in the local construction community. Based on your consultations, if there was a second tender process, do you see the capacity to get bids and get that work done by the end of the year?
Mr. Chair, all I can state is if we do re-tender, I can't assure any outcome to that tender process. The market is very busy, but as a staff member, I can't provide any assurance of what an outcome of a follow-up tender would be.
Okay, so based on that, I see a lot of risk with trying to go through a second tender this year, more risk than going through with the staff recommendation. On Councillor Brennan's comments about a public meeting, I think that, yes, public consultations is important, but it's important for everybody to note right now that we do not have a viable project because it came in over budget. So until we have some kind of a viable option to move forward on, I don't support having a public meeting because there's no project to move forward with. So since the Beckwith Street project is more or less on hold right now, I think it's a great idea to move forward with staff's recommendation. I'm really confident in the due diligence that's been done. I see a majority support around the horseshoe, but yeah, Councillor Brennan.
So are we going to split the motions up when it comes to council? Yeah.
Okay, so is there a consensus?
Do a straw vote.
I'm not sure I see the necessity for it, and I would suggest to you that this is part of the DBA. In every other downtown reconstruction project or redevelopment project, the DBA was heavily involved in all that communication piece, and all that that interaction between downtown business was not really led by. I don't mean to be insulting, but it wasn't really led by Public Works. It was led by the Downtown Business Association. So I would like to have more. I'm speaking for the DBA right now because I'm on that board and I'm up to my armpits in it. But I would like something from the DBA. I think they would. The discussions by staff is taking place on a very often basis between Director Dunlop and the DBA. I think that's been fairly constant through this.
Okay, CAO Morris.
Yes, thank you. I think that the purpose of the third recommendation was really to make it very public that we need to engage with our partners, and I think we have functional support to do that around the table, so I think we're comfortable at a staff level to keep doing that. But I'll just give you one example of something we need to pivot on because of the delay. So we didn't order a full suite of flowers for Beckwith this year because we expected it would be under construction. So we need to have a dialogue. What are we going to do now quickly to get flowers in the downtown, knowing that the likelihood of construction during the summer season isn't there? So there were some practical elements to pivoting based on this decision, and I think I'm comfortable certainly that there's support around the table that we keep engaging with the downtown business community, and if everyone's comfortable like that, with that, we'll continue to communicate with them. We now have, based on the decision that's about to be made, we have something concrete to tell them. Before that, we didn't.
Thank you. Councillor Dwyer.
Thank you. On that note, I would still like to suggest that we split them because I will be supporting one and not the other, and I would like that to be noted.
Right, thank you, Councillor Alford.
Just the flowers, some of the furniture, all of this was provided by the DBA in past, and their promotions committee and beautification committee have still been very, very active too. But when the tender was rejected, the DBA hit pause on 3 different committees so that we knew how we were going to move forward. Hopefully with this, we can at least move forward with parts of the plan that were already in place.
Councillor Brennan.
Thanks. I don't want to get in the weeds with this. I mean, it's pretty simple. It's just a procedural question. Can we split the recommendations up and have a separate motion? The council directs staff to enter into discussions with the downtown business community. Otherwise, I can't support 3 together. So I'd like to support the 3rd. If not, then so be it. So I guess we should do is have a straw vote. It's pretty simple.
Mayor Panko.
I mean, I support all 3 recommendations, and I don't see any real concerns with splitting it if that creates some comfort for some members of council. I mean, in the end, we will all make our decisions based on our level of support for each one, so. No
Yeah,
big deal.
I think the more unity we can build on this topic, the better. So if we can split it up and get more consensus, that's a win for everybody. Is there any further discussion on that before we'll 1 and 2 and 3 into 2 separate? Okay, so do we need to take a straw vote on 1 and 2 first?
Just split. Well, just 1 straw vote. Yeah, then we'll split.
We want to have a vote to split them. Is there not consensus for that right now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so it's agreed upon that we're going to split them. Now, do we have a straw vote on the first 2? Okay, so all those in favor of 1 and 2? Okay, so seeing a majority around the table, I think the recommendation carries, and for recommendation number 3, it's unanimous, so we will all recommendations are passed. So thank you, Director Dunlop. CO Morris.
So just for clarification, so the consensus you got opens the pathway for it to go to council next week for ratification. Okay, thanks.
Excellent, thank you. So seeing no standing items, we'll move to adjournment. Councillor Brennan, Councillor Allen, all those in favor? Carried.